Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. The email arrived on a Tuesday, sandwiched between a grocery store flyer and a notification about my library books being due. Just a simple subject line. Thinking of you and wondering if I could visit. Mark. Mark. It had been, 3 years since Robert passed. 4? Time gets slippery after loss. Mark wasn't just any friend. He was Robert's best friend since childhood, the other pea in their inseparable pod. They'd shared scraped knees, first beers, college dorm rooms. And eventually, Mark had been the best man at our wedding. Seeing his name pop up sent a strange jolt through me, a mix of warmth and a sudden, sharp pang of grief I hadn't felt so acutely in months. The house felt particularly quiet that afternoon, the late autumn sun slanting through the living room windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, particles of the life Robert and I had built, now suspended in stillness. I reread the email. He mentioned he'd be passing through the state for a work conference about an hour away, and thought, if I was amenable, he'd like to stop by, just for an afternoon, maybe grab a coffee, catch up. It sounded innocent enough, polite even, but my stomach fluttered with an odd nervousness. After Robert died, the initial flood of support, calls, casseroles, visits, had eventually slowed to a trickle, then mostly stopped. Not out of unkindness, I think, but because life for everyone else necessarily moved on. Mark had sent flowers, called a few times in those first awful weeks, his voice thick with shared sorrow. But then, silence. I hadn't reached out either. What was there to say? We were linked by Robert, and without him, the connection felt frayed, awkward. Part of me wanted to say no, to keep my quiet routine undisturbed. Grief makes you protective of your solitude. But another part, a smaller, rustling part, one hadn't acknowledged much, felt a flicker of curiosity. Mark knew Robert in ways I never did, the boyhood secrets, the preemie adventures. Maybe talking to him would feel like having a tiny piece of Robert back, just for an afternoon. I typed back a simple reply. Mark, it would be lovely to see you. Let me know what day works best. His response came quickly. Friday afternoon. He'd aimed to arrive around 2. Suddenly, my quiet house seemed too quiet, too dusty, too full of Robert's absence. I spent the next few days in a strange flurry of activity, not just cleaning, but tidying, straightening pictures on the wall, including the big one from our wedding where Mark stood beaming beside Robert. I even bought fresh flowers, something I hadn't done, just for myself in ages. Lilies, Robert's favorite. Their heavy scent filled the entryway, a fragrant ghost. Why was I so anxious? It was just Mark. Kind, steady Mark, with his easy laugh and slightly rumpled look that never seemed to change. Was I worried about dredging up painful memories? Or was it something else, something harder to name? A fear of facing how much life had changed, seeing Robert's absence reflected in his best friend's eyes. Friday arrived, crisp and clear. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple blue sweater Robert had always liked. I made coffee, arranging cookies on a plate, the kind my mother used to make, the ones Robert and Mark would devour after school. The clock ticked towards 2 with agonizing slowness. Then, exactly on time, a modest sedan pulled into the driveway. My heart did a peculiar little jump. Taking a deep breath, I opened the front door just as Mark was reaching for the bell. He looked older, of course, more gray threaded through his dark hair, deeper lines etched around his eyes. But the smile was the same, warm, a little hesitant. Sarah, he said, his voice softer than I remembered. It's good to see you. You too, Mark. I managed stepping back. Come on in." He entered the house, his gaze sweeping around the familiar hallway, lingering for a moment on the wedding photo. I saw a flicker of sadness cross his face before he masked it with another smile. "Place looks great, just the same." "Mostly," I said, leading him towards the living room. "Some things change, some stay the same, I guess." We sat, him on the sofa, me in the armchair opposite. Robert's armchair. An awkward silence stretched for a moment, filled only by the ticking clock and the faint scent of lilies. He cleared his throat. "So, how have you been holding up?" "Really?" The directness surprised me, but I appreciated it. No platitudes, no dancing around the elephant in the room, the massive Robert-shaped hole in both our lives. I took a breath, deciding to be honest. "It's okay, Mark. Some days are better than others. You know how it is." I fiddled with the edge of a cushion. "It's quieter than I ever thought possible." He nodded slowly, his eyes full of understanding. "Yeah, I still pick up the phone sometimes, thinking I'll call him about some stupid thing I saw, or a game score. Then I remember." He looked down at his hands. "It leaves a big silence, doesn't it?" And just like that, the awkwardness began to melt away, replaced by the shared language of loss. We talked about Robert then, easily, naturally. Mark shared a story about a fishing trip they took as teenagers, one I'd never heard, involving a capsized canoe and a very angry swan. I laughed, a real, genuine laugh that felt rusty, but good. I told him about Robert's disastrous attempt at baking sourdough bread during the early days of our marriage, resulting in something resembling fossilized brick. We passed the afternoon like that, trading memories like precious stones, each one bringing Robert vividly back into the room, not as a source of pain, but as the warm, funny, slightly exasperating man we both had loved. Mark asked about my job at the library, about my garden, listening intently. He seemed genuinely interested, not just making polite conversation. He noticed the small changes, the new bookshelf, the different curtains in the dining room. "You painted in here?" he asked, gesturing towards the kitchen walls. Now a soft sage green instead of the cheerful yellow Robert had insisted on. "Yes," I smiled. Felt like time for a change. Yellow was never really my color. He chuckled. "Tell me about it." Robert painted our college apartment bathroom that exact shade. Said it was optimistic. It mostly just hurt my eyes in the morning. We moved into the kitchen for more coffee. As I poured, Mark leaned against the counter, looking out the window at the backyard. The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across the lawn. He loved this garden. Mark said quietly, "Spent hours out here, didn't he?" "He did," I confirmed, handing him a mug. "Especially the roses. He was so proud of them." Mark turned from the window, his expression thoughtful. "You know, Sarah," he began a little hesitantly, "part of the reason I wanted to stop by, well, besides seeing you, of course, there was something Robert asked me to do. A long time ago. He made me promise." My brow furrowed. A promise? Robert hadn't mentioned anything to me. What was it? Mark took a sip of his coffee, gathering his thoughts. It was right after he got his first serious diagnosis, the one they thought they'd beaten. We were having a beer late one night, and he got philosophical, scared, I think, though he tried not to show it. He paused, looking me directly in the eye. He made me promise that if anything ever happened to him, I'd check in on you. Not just right away, but later, down the road. Make sure you were really okay. And he hesitated again. He asked me to give you something, but only when I felt the time was right. My heart gave another strange lurch. Something he wanted Mark to give me? Why wouldn't he have given it to me himself? Or left it with his will? What is it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mark reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small, worn, leather-bound book. It wasn't a book for reading. It looked more like a journal or a diary, held shut by a thin leather strap. It looked old, softened with use. He held it out to me. He called it his gratitude journal. Mark explained softly. He started it way back, even before he met you, I think. Wrote down things he was thankful for, moments that mattered. He wasn't always the best at saying things out loud, especially the deep stuff. He said this held the things he didn't always know how to express. And he wanted you to have it someday. I took the journal, my fingers trembling slightly as they brushed against his. The leather was soft, almost velvety, molded by years of being held. It felt warm, intimate, a tangible piece of Robert the First never knew existed. I traced the worn cover, a knot forming in my throat. Why hadn't he told me? Why give it to Mark? Perhaps he knew I wouldn't be ready to read it right away. Perhaps he needed the buffer of time, and Mark, his steadfast friend, was the keeper of that time. He said you'd know when to read it, Mark continued, his voice gentle, or if you even wanted to. No pressure, but he wanted you to have the option. I clutched the small book to my chest, a sudden wave of emotion washing over me. Grief? Yes, but also a profound sense of being seen, of being loved across the years, across the silence of death itself. Tears pricked my eyes. Thank you, Mark, I whispered, the words thick. Thank you for keeping this safe, for bringing it. He just nodded, a deep understanding in his gaze. We stood there in the quiet kitchen, the fading light painting the room in shades of gold and gray, the unspoken weight of Robert's life, his love, and his foresight filling the space between us. It wasn't just a journal. It was a message, a connection, delivered by the one person Robert trusted implicitly, the unexpectedness of the gift, the depth of Robert's planning, and Mark's quiet fulfillment of his promise. It was overwhelming, but in a strangely comforting way. Mark cleared his throat gently. There's one more thing, Sarah, part of the promise. I looked up curious. He made me promise I'd help you fix the back gate if it was still sticking. I blinked, then let out a watery chuckle. The back gate. It had been sticking for years, a minor annoyance Robert always meant to fix but never got around to. It seemed such a small, mundane detail after the gravity of the journal. It's still sticking, I admitted, a small smile touching my lips. Always, Mark grinned, the familiar sparkle back in his eyes. Some things never change. He glanced at the clock on the microwave. Look, I probably should get going soon. Head towards the conference hotel. But if you've got a screwdriver and maybe some oil, I could take a quick look. For Robert, it felt right. A practical task, a shared moment of fixing something tangible after dealing with so much intangible emotion. It felt like, Robert, I think I have just the things, I said, leading the way to the cluttered drawer beside the back door where Robert kept his tools. We went out into the cool evening air. The gate, wooden and weathered, groaned in protest as Mark examined its hinges. He fiddled with the latch, tightened a few screws, and applied some lubricant I found in the garage. We didn't talk much, working side by side in comfortable silence, the only sounds the metallic scrape of the screwdriver and the chirping of crickets starting their evening song. There was a simple satisfaction in the task, a quiet camaraderie. He was fulfilling a promise, and I was letting him. It was a small act, but it felt significant, a bridge between the past and the present. He swung the gate open and closed a few times. It moved smoothly, silently. "There," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Good as new, or at least better than it was." He turned to me, a genuine smile on his face. Promise kept. The sun had dipped below the trees now, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple. A profound sense of peace settled over me, something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Standing there with Mark, Robert's oldest friend, having received this unexpected piece of my husband's heart and witnessing this simple act of loyalty felt like a turning point. Mark gathered his jacket from the kitchen chair. The atmosphere felt different now, lighter, warmer. The initial awkwardness was long gone, replaced by a renewed sense of connection, not just through Robert, but between us. "Thank you, Sarah," he said sincerely, pausing at the door, "for letting me come by, for sharing the afternoon." "Thank you, Mark," I replied, meeting his gaze. "For everything, the journal, the gate, just talking." He nodded. "Take care of yourself, Sarah, and don't be a stranger, okay? If you ever feel like talking or need anything." "You too, Mark," I said. He gave a small wave and walked back to his car. I watched him drive away, the red taillights disappearing down the quiet street. Closing the door, I leaned against it for a moment, the small leather-bound journal still clutched in my hand. The house didn't feel quite so empty anymore. The silence seemed softer, less absolute. Mark's visit, unexpected as it was, had brought more than just memories. It brought connection, closure of a kind I hadn't anticipated, and the tangible proof of Robert's enduring love in the form of the journal. I walked back into the living room, now bathed in the soft glow of the lamps I'd switched on. I sat in my own chair this time, not Robert's, and placed the journal on the side table. I wasn't ready to open it yet, not tonight. But knowing it was there, knowing Mark had honored his promise, felt like a gift. It wasn't about replacing Robert or erasing the grief. It was about understanding that connections can endure, that friendship can bridge the gap left by loss, and that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can bring the most profound comfort. Life hadn't magically become easy, but something had shifted within me. A window had opened, letting in a little light, a little air. It was a reminder that even after the deepest loss, life holds possibilities for connection, for understanding, and for quiet growth. And sometimes it starts with an old friend stopping by, fulfilling a promise, and helping you fix a sticking gate.